Beautiful. Ready, set, data. Finally live. Sorry, everybody. I had some issues getting some things going, but I think I'm with everybody now. I'm Anthony Fortner, data engineer. With me is Lee Markham, database administrator. Um, but we're here and we're ready to rock and roll. So, how's things going, Lee? You doing all right?
Yeah, things are going okay. It's been busy, but
Yeah.
that's pretty par for the course.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just a lot of work as always, but that's okay. I'm enjoying it, learning things, so it's been good for sure.
Yeah, it's always a game of catch up. I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, what's going on with
We've
you?
had kind of all hands on decks ourselves at work, so plowing through things and making the environment better. So that's been a lot of fun actually. Um, so I'm eager to find out what the exciting topic is you have for us today.
Okay, yeah. So I been through some production troubleshooting, and when you first have an issue or a problem and there's not an immediate solution or an immediate idea on why we're having an issue or a problem, often what someone will eventually ask is, well, what changed? Who changed something? What's different? And so one of the realizations I came to recently was that I can actually use the transaction log and the information stored in it through the transaction log backups to help figure out what changed from a SQL Server workload perspective. And so, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about is the transaction log backups, and then kind of how to use that in theory, because I don't have transaction log backups to show you, but we'll walk you through the concepts and the ideas on this particular topic.
Awesome. That sounds meaty. That's some internal stuff going on. I like it. I'm a
Yeah.
fan.
So just going to do like a quick primer on the transaction log for SQL Server. I'm not going to get super technical, or I'm going to try not to anyway. This is meant as an overview. So the transaction log on SQL Server is, or should be, a single file. There's no purpose to having more than one transaction log. The only time that you would do something like that is if you're in an emergency because the transaction log is full and you have ignored your monitoring that should have been telling you that the transaction log was close to being full and that your disks that your transaction logs are on were close to being full. If you ignored all that and your transaction log is now full, really just about the only thing you can do is add another transaction log and it'll start using that. So that emergency aside, and that is an emergency, you only have one file, one transaction log file, and it's kind of a circular file. Let's say it's 100 gig, make up a number. There are certain sections in it which are called active sections or marked as active, and each time there's an insert, an update, or a delete that's happening inside a database, that information gets pushed down into the transaction log. You also get things like index rebuilds because it's actually changing the data of the index. So you get that in the transaction log as well. And I also I think that checkpoints are logged, and that gets flushed into the transaction log. So it's a place that is going to keep all your changes. And I know database professionals watching this either live or later probably going to hate this analogy, but let's imagine that you have an Excel spreadsheet full of data. Let's pretend it's a telephone book, because we all know what those are, of course.
I don't know what's worse. You just said Excel sheet or a telephone book.
Let's say that you have your contacts from your phone in a
Oh yeah.
spreadsheet. How about that? And you're typing away, making changes to the spreadsheet. You want to update that, make sure that it has all the correct data. Well, every time you add a row to the Excel sheet, actually Excel also tracks that. If you update or change a piece of data within a single row, Excel tracks that. If you delete a row, Excel tracks that. That's how you have the undo button, and you can go back. Right. So it's the same thing in the transaction SQL Server transaction log. It keeps track of all of that. And so as it does that and then gets backed up, all of those changes are stored in a backup file. And which obviously files of any kind have a certain size. So if you can imagine your spreadsheet, if you started with 100 rows and you've inserted 1,000 rows because you're famous on social media now, then you've added a lot of changes to your Excel sheet. So there would be a lot for Excel to undo if you needed to go all the way back. Same thing if you were updating that. If you were deleting rows, maybe you have lost a lot of followers and you're going to delete all your lost followers kind of thing. All of that adds to the size of the file. So when SQL Server saves all of those changes, that impacts the size of your transaction log backup. So here's the point of talking quickly about all of that, is that your transaction log backup size can tell you about changes to your workload, or at least changes to the patterns in your workload. If you query that information, which I'll show a link here in a moment to the place where I started with recently to get this information. If you query that, you can get the transaction log backup size over time. So let's say if you wanted to look at last month, you want to look at January's transaction log backups, and you get all of those in your query window, or since we've talked about Excel, maybe you want to put it in Excel to look at it, or for someone else to look at who doesn't have access to SQL Server. And you can actually chart or track the size of your transaction logs day by day, hour by hour. So if you were looking for a change that happened on a particular day because you suspect, or because the application, so let's say the application team is saying, hey, back on January 15th, the application started being slow and we don't really know why. We don't know what's going on. And nobody can really, nobody can find the smoking gun.
This right, could be hard sometimes.
Yeah, it is. This could be one way to see, well, did the workload for this database change? Mm-hmm. And so you look at the data prior to the 15th and then after the 15th, and you see, well, did my transaction log backup suddenly increase in size a lot? So if your average backup for your transaction log between the 1st and the 14th was 500 meg, and then sometime on the 15th through the rest of the month, now it's 2 gig. That tells you that you have a lot more activity happening in that particular database than you did in the second half of the month than you did in the first half.
Yeah, one of the analogies I've used in the past was it's less of storage and more of a tachometer, which people think is strange because I know you're storing stuff, right? But that needle moves up whenever mm-hmm. there's a lot of churn in your data, right? And then if it's lower, when it's less churn. So that's one way you can gauge.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a good way for you to help pinpoint that something changed, or when it changed, and for which databases, by looking at the history of your backups and your transaction log backups. So the place that I went is a favorite of mine. I came across an MS SQL Tips article, and I love MS SQL Tips because they show a problem and then they step through how to solve that problem, usually with a lot of demo code that's really well explained. And so when I went out to this particular site, there's a query in there, and um, one of the pieces of data that gets returned in the query was backup size. Now, this particular post isn't about SQL Server backup size, but because it's part of the query already, I lifted that query out and then modified it to get me averages for whatever range of time I was looking at. So if I wanted to know transaction log size for the month of January, then I average all of that data, and you can use date part to pick out the different parts that you want. So I used date part to get the month. I used, because there's a time element to your transaction logs, I used that to the date part to get the hour of the day. So for each day, I can look at each hour of that day and then track the transaction log backup size. And then I can average it over whatever range I'm interested in. So if you don't care, maybe your application really is only busy between, I don't know, 2 and 6, 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Then you can, using T-SQL language, you just focus on those hours, use date part and a where clause to focus on 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. and average just that part. And compare that, if the first part of the month to the second part, or January to February, whatever comparison range you need. So that was kind of my approach. It was an interesting exercise, and I think it can be super useful.
It's a novel idea. I haven't really thought about that, actually tracking that.
Yeah, and of course, the other things that you can do with that is, if you trend that over time, you can see like growth in your database, that sort of thing. As your backups get larger, this would be more for like full backups. But as your full backups get larger, obviously your database is growing. Then you can trend that growth, and then make estimates for what I'm going to need in terms of data size over the next 3 months, 6 months, year, whatever.
Right. The full backup will tell you literally the storage, how much room it's taking up. I'm skipping over a few things there, but the log backups, you track those, and that shows you your churn, how much is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone looking for a way to figure out what changed when everyone says, well, nothing changed, this could be a way to pinpoint that something did change and when it changed. So any questions, thoughts about that, or other? I don't know.
I mean, no other, just other. No. So yeah, I mean, I think the topic was, how to determine if there's changes or not. But it kind of also talked about how you can use that information in other ways, just tracking how much has changed. The average time doesn't tell you what changed, but you can definitely see, the impact, how much changed. If you happen to know, that there is a massive deployment, or a new app went out, or maybe even code didn't change, but there was marketing did something crazy, and now there's a ton of attention, and then your site's getting hit, and maybe that's a good thing for sales, and then you're getting hit, and you're seeing that that impacts your logs.
Yeah.
So that's I think that's a great way to track that, and I haven't thought about that. Oh,
Cool.
hi. Can you share the query details link for log backup history details?
Uh,
Was it the link you had up, or is that a different link?
log backup history. Yeah. So that is the. First of all, great question. That is the query that I had. Let me put the banner back up, and you can see that. So here is the link out. If you Googled
Mm.
MS SQL tips or Bing or whatever your favorite internet search is, MS SQL tips backup history, you would find
DuckDuckGo,
this.
ChatGTP.
Yeah, you would find this link and probably others that do similar things. So there's the link to the blog post that I used. Also, as you could tell from the URL, if you did MS SQL tips and you knew what tip number you were looking for, you could find it that way.
Or maybe if it helps, just search script to retrieve SQL Server database if that fits neatly in your brain. Um, that URL spells it out.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's asking me
Or just paste it in for him.
to put it in. Yeah, I mean, yeah. One moment.
Uh,
All right,
Other
so that went
questions.
out to YouTube. I don't know if I can get it to LinkedIn because of the way we're streaming. So
Oh, well,
we'll see.
I know we have some resourceful people listening, so I
Yeah.
think it'll get worked out. Um, yeah. So you said questions and whatnot. So back to that. So you said you can determine what changes. If you follow that tutorial, you could literally see what tables are impacted. If there's a hey, this was really massive. This particular backup log was really massive. Will that tell you literally what changed, like
No.
inside the
So
logs, so to speak?
so the only way that this question came up, so the only way that you can see literally what changed from the transaction log itself is if you use a different function to query the transaction log, basically real time.
Okay.
So that will only show you what's in the active part of the transaction log, though, I believe. The other way is a way that we've used before, which is a SQL Server feature called temporal tables.
Oh yeah.
So,
If you know the table, then you can know exactly the change.
true, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, so yeah, if you if you knew the process that was slow for your application, your application team and or you as the DBA or database engineer, the person responsible for tracking down the issue, whatever your title is, um, then
Primary
yes,
problem solver.
you primary problem solver, exactly. Then you can use that information from the application side to say, oh, this is the process that's slow. These are the three tables involved. And then, yeah, if you have temporal tables set up for those, then you can use its history tracking, its history table to actually see the changes, query the changes and see the history of what changed and when.
Fun. We're getting more questions. So, how to get SQL queries that are using memory in the last 2 hours of usage. So I have a quick answer, and I'm curious if you have
Yeah.
anything to add. Monitoring tools. Whatever the monitoring tool du jour is, SQL Sentry or otherwise, um, they have that functionality. You go in there and especially if you like the graphs and whatnot, you're paying good money, you might as well have pretty graphs, and that's how you'd find that. I was seeing a lot of that today actually. So we were tracking down what the problem was in our environment as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's not why Lee picked this topic, but yeah, we were definitely trying to figure out who's using the most this, that, and the other thing. Although it was mostly
Right.
CPU in our case. I wasn't sure if you had anything
I
more
do have.
specific than what I just said.
Well, that was a great idea. And that was really the first thing that you should have in place. I'm a big believer in monitoring. software. So that would be the first thing that you should look at is what does your monitoring software show you? The second thing is query store. So if you're on SQL Server 2016 and above, you can actually use query store and query store options to find queries that are using the most memory. I have another idea.
So while you figure that out, the OP asking the question, yeah. So if query store is an option, look into that. You know, everyone's environment's different. Older machine, or you don't have query store. If it's not too old, if you can have query store, I recommend looking at it. Getting that in your system.
Let's see. Oh, yeah. I'm not looking at the right thing.
We're figuring this out live, people.
Blitz Cache. So SP Blitz Cache.
From Breno Ozar.
Yeah, open source thing that he started and then kind of turned over to the community. Let me, I think there is a sort order option. One moment. Yes. So, yeah. Okay. So let me get this together and then I'll drop it into, I'll get it set up so I can show it on this chat and on the screen.
Yeah. And I think what you're dropping in chat is showing up. It just on our screen says it's only one of the places we're streaming to because they're receiving the note in the other system. And I think it's just the way it looks to us. I think we're good.
So let's see.
And while you get that figured out, so use Blitz and you can run that and record that information somewhere. So you can look back at it later if that's what you're asking, because he's asking how are you able to track that? You know, I'm guessing he means not live. I can't push the button right now. Run that over and over again at a regular basis and store that, log that somewhere. So when you do want to look at the past hour, 2 hours, 24 hours, you can look at those logs. Due diligence or cleaning up after yourself, though.
Yeah, so I dropped it into the chat. Let me see how this shows up. See if that's that's okay.
Not bad.
So what you can do is use this to find memory grant and unused grant for queries. So let me talk about that for a little bit. Memory grant is, or actually, do you want to talk about it? Because I know that you probably know some things about memory grants for queries. You want to explain or talk about this particular usage, or have you used this before?
I have not done this particular search on Blitz Cache.
Okay.
So yeah, you could probably go ahead and lead.
Okay. So when a query is submitted to SQL Server does a number of things to figure out, how much RAM is going to be needed to run this query.
It makes an educated guess.
Yes, it makes a very educated guess based on things that you've done when you designed your database, which we should talk about later. Or hopefully you've done. And if you didn't do them, then you might be in trouble. So what happens is that SQL Server says, okay, I think this query that you've given me is going to cost or going to need 1 gig of RAM. And then it looks and sees if it has a gig of RAM to give this query. If it doesn't have a gig of RAM, then your query experiences what's called resource semaphore wait. It's waiting for memory. It doesn't even get to start until that 1 gig of memory is available. So this would be a way to find large memory grant queries
that are waiting in line for their turn with the full memory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't start building the house until you have all the wood.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I like that. The other thing here is the SP Blitz cache at sorter equals unused grant. So that can help you find things that were granted a gig of RAM and only use 200 meg.
And so do you have a good answer as to why that's a problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem because you're using up more of your resources than you have to. So let's say, if you're granted, what did I say, a gig of RAM and you only use 200? So that's 800 meg of RAM that SQL Server gave to this query that it couldn't give to this one, or that wasn't available.
And now it's waiting in line, like your first example.
Potentially, yes. Yeah. I mean, if you have that many queries that have a large memory grant, and then in turn have a large unused grant, then let's say you have 64 gig of RAM in your SQL Server. But if 32 of it is wasted because it's unused grants, then that's 32 gig of RAM your SQL Server doesn't have to give out.
Do you remember offhand, and you don't have to look it up if you don't, the percentage of the RAM, like how large of a grant can you get? I know there's a limit, and I think it's a percentage. Does that sound right to you?
It does sound right. Off the top of my head, I don't know that information.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think someone on the internet, it's the internet, so someone will correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's like 25% or 50% or something like that. Let's say 25%, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But there's a very large amount of RAM that it can be granted, whatever that limit is. And as you can imagine, if you're getting hit by applications and servers and people's access databases, if each one of those is taking up a huge percentage of your RAM because something isn't tuned correctly, there's going to be a log jam. And what's the first thing a user does when their web page is going slow? F5. Reload that. And now each one of those, in theory, it could be loading up behind one another. And now you have timeouts. And now you're on a call with a bunch of other smart people pulling your hair out while you all try to figure out what to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for posting that, guys. I see that someone posted SP Blitz Catch. So that way, the people who aren't getting our messages can get that. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. It was some. Here's what I was going to tell you also about SP Blitz Cache. So you are querying the current cache of RAM. So you can't look for something that happened an hour ago. Well, possibly you can, depending on how your RAM is being used, how much churn there is in there. But keep in mind, the point is the results from SP Blitz Cache are what's in the memory right now. So if you're troubleshooting something and you getting this information out of the cache, and some other person on the team or in your company thinks that restarting the SQL Server is a good idea, that clears your cache. So now you can't know what was going on. You can't use that information because it's gone.
That feels like a possible catalyst for entire other conversation too.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, that's SP Blitz Cache, the answer to one of the questions. So I appreciate that question. It was a good one.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm not 100% sure. How are we doing on time? I know that we're up against the wall tonight. Do we want to do a second topic? Unless we get more questions from the audience.
We can. I mean, I have like 30 minutes.
In chat saying, we can't restart the prod instance? Oh, you can, but should you?
Yeah. Let's not do that willy-nilly.
Yeah, that causes more problems than not.
Yeah, I mean, it's like restarting your computer at home to fix a problem. Will
Yeah.
it fix the problem at that moment? Yes, but, well, it could, but you didn't really find the source of the problem, so it's likely to just come back.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm thinking. And then the follow up was due to a memory issue. So maybe I went jovial a little too quickly there, and oh, he doesn't want to restart. Okay, yeah, yeah. No, we don't want to restart it for a number of reasons. But what Lee just said is exactly where my mind went right off the bat, because I have had people suggest that non-ironically, saying, "Well, we've done that in the past and it made things better." Yes, that's been said. So that's hiding, that's obfuscate. Oh, I should try to say that word. That's hiding the problem, and you will never end up solving the problem if that happens. So,
Right.
if you guys have ever heard someone ask you to do that unironically, yeah, it's kind of saddening.
One other thought
So,
I had is because of the prompts from the comments about restarting prod instance due to memory issues, is you can, if you find this problem and you find the queries and you're on enterprise edition of SQL Server, you can use something called the resource governor. And the resource governor can be used to control the amount of RAM that any one query gets. So if you have a memory grant that's out of control and you can't tune your way out of it, meaning in this case, you can't redesign the table, which is usually how you fix something like that, then short term, until you do redesign the table, and you should, you can use the resource governor to control and say, oh, it only gets 5% of the RAM or however much you calculate. So
yeah, when you had when you're talking about Blitz Cache, you're talking about grants and all that. I posed the question, well, what why do you want to know who's asking for too much RAM and not using it? One of the
yeah.
things I was thinking of at the time was that means there's queries that are being a hog. They're being
Mm-hmm.
greedy and they're taking more than they need. And resource governor is could be helpful if you're going to say, okay, these are being greedy. Let's restrict how much they have access to
Mm-hmm.
until we get a permanent solution. Because sometimes we can't make major changes unless it's after hours or after it's reviewed. Some environments, there's a lot of change processes you have to go through. You can't just change things willy nilly. So, yeah,
Yeah.
you might be able to, on the DBA team, restrict something while you get that code changed. That the code could be third party. That's a good example
Yeah.
of slow to change, right? Or it's not going to.
Right. Absolutely. So there's another question in there just about how do you log this information for current last 2 hours. On that, if you simply use a search engine and look for log SP Blitz cache to a table, you will get hits on how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very it's straightforward to make that happen.
Yep.
And so that would be my answer to that. I don't have code in front of me, but it's out there on the internet, pretty easy to find.
Yeah, yeah. There's more than one person who's has done that. Yeah, so that way you can just have it all logged, and when you do need to look it up, you'll have it available.
Yep. Anything on this else on this topic?
I don't think so. I think we're good to roll forward if you like.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so for our next trick, ladies and gentlemen, in the past I said I was going to try to focus on um, some of the initial skills you need to be a data professional. Um, we have plenty of the topics that have been very level 300. We literally talked about transaction log backups today, and so I'm trying to bring something to the table for some of the audience who've mentioned that they're in the early stages, right? A little bit of something for everybody. So today we'll just simply talk about joins. Um, I did originally want to do a screen share and use SQL Fiddle. I had code set aside and ready for that. but that was down last time I tried, and so we're just gonna roll forward and we're just gonna have a conversation about joins. So first, inner join. So actually, let me take a step back. In these conversations, I'm gonna do a lot of I'm gonna say left table and right table a lot. Um, I'm actually very picky about that when I write my SQL. I very deliberately choose the table that I want to be on the left, and then I move the ones to the right. And in my join, I will list the left one first and the right one second. I do that over and over and over again. So that way, when I look at old code, or anyone who works with me looks at my code, they have a good idea of what I'm thinking. Obviously, obviously, it just that's a preference. That's not considered a standard as far as I know, but it's a good practice, right? It also makes these left join, right join conversations easier when I get to those. So, inner join. So first you choose what table to be on the left. So in the example I had, you have let's say the left table is classes at school. So you want to know what students are in those classes. So you choose the students table to be your right table. So you take those and you do an inner join. You will only get results that are from both tables. So the students that are in the class, right? Um, and you'll see this as a Venn diagram, and you just go to Google right now, Bing, DuckDuckGo, ChatGPT. I guess it won't give you pictures. And you look up joins, you almost always see the Venn diagram. Inner join is the part of the circle, the two circles that both things overlap. Now, sorry about that. Left join, I had my notes repeating itself. The left join. So now we start with a left table, and when we join the right table, we're saying we want everything in that left table. And then we're going to join what we can from the right table. So in my initial scenario, I was starting with classes on the left and students on the right. So when I will get all the classes even if they don't have students. So the question we could be asking in this scenario is, what classes don't have students? Because the inner join just won't show those classes. The left join will. The right join, which Lee, do you end up typing right join very often or at all?
Only very occasionally, and when I do, it freaks people out.
I might be one of those people. No, I almost never do a right join in the wild, because odds are, if there's the table that I feel is very important for what I'm about to do, the question I'm about to ask, it ends up on the left. Like I said, I'm very picky about that. It's just the way I'm wired. Has to do with the way I learned, I guess. But so in my scenario, let's say I really wanted to keep the class table on the left side, and I'm doing a right join to my students. Well, then you're going to get all the students regardless of whether or not they are in a class. So the question you could be asking, and I don't know if you've noticed, usually they say, here's the question, here's how I solve it, I'm doing it the other way, is, well, okay, I have all these students, who's not in a class? And that will tell you that. And the Venn diagram, the right circle's colored in, but some of the left circle's not. But yeah, I don't see that very often. I think it helps people's mental flow to just keep things as an inner join or a left join.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, and I missed something earlier. The inner joins, a lot of times they don't even say inner. So you're in SQL Server, you just see join, it's an inner. They let you leave that off. Sorry, drinking water. Anyway, next up. So same question I asked you before. So the full outer. So full outer join. Do you do that very often, Lee?
I'm not a fan of a Cartesian product. No.
Look at you pulling out the $5 word. Wow.
I've never had a
Yeah.
need
So
to do it.
I'm not gonna say I don't like. I'm not a fan or something like that. It's just I don't. I was trying really hard. I was trying really hard to think of a scenario because I haven't done that recently at all. So
Yeah.
conceptually, a full auto join is like doing the left and the right, the left join and a right
Mm-hmm.
join conceptually, where you're going to get everything no matter what. Like why would you? So you're basically it's because you need all the data in both tables regardless of that there's a matching key. So I really thought I thought of a scenario yesterday, but it's apparently not in my notes. So yeah, I've seen it recently. The recent time I've seen it was actually on a quiz, so I don't feel like that counts. Yeah, you need to see all the data in both tables, and you're joining the data together. And it's okay if so. Let's say you're pulling it in, and you're going to get your students and your classes and your students. Trying to use the correct hands here, and you do a full auto join. You'll see students in this table, in this result set, I should say. I'm sorry. In this result set, you'll see all the students. It doesn't matter if they have a class or not. You're going to see them. And maybe your application needs to process that. Same thing for the classes. Even if there's no students in the class, you will get this back. And maybe this was just the way that the application was designed. They need to get that information and bring it in. Or maybe it's not application at all. I'm a little application biased. You're an analyst. You need that information, and you're going to put that in, let's say, an Excel sheet, and you're going to break it down and pivot it out. And you're going to end up just that one query. Hey, I found a scenario. From that one query, you're going to be able to classes that don't have people, find people who don't have classes, get ads, and figure out all the insights you need to get from that. So, okay, I fell into an example. I love it. Okay, so the next one, I see it named two ways, and it makes me nervous that there's a slight difference between the two names. I'm going to say two names and assume that I can trust the internet to correct me if they're not the same thing. Anti-semi-join or an anti-join. I think people just say anti-join a lot of times, but I think those are the same thing. Does that sound right to you, Lee?
Yeah. I think they are, but I don't know the details on that one.
Yeah, I think they're the same thing. So the internet will scream at me if I am wrong. That is for
they
sure.
will, yes.
So the why on this one, it may not be as obvious. When you want records from the left table where they do not match any records in the right table. So the syntax in SQL Server is going to be the same as a left join. As you remember, this is where you want all the data from the left table, regardless if it joins the right table. But what separates anti-join from a left join is the inclusion of a predicate or a where clause that requires the data to be missing from the right table. So I feel like this one's actually more common, even though it has an interesting name. The example, your boss says, give me all the students that are not enrolled in a class, or all the locations that do not have an address. I feel like that's questions that get asked a lot. Hey, who hasn't done a thing? Who, what information do we still need to find? It happens all the time. In the scenario I just gave, I did say the predicate is the predicate will say something along the lines of where this column is null. That's how I almost always do it. I don't know how I got into that. When I was taking these notes and I did some looking up, a lot of people do not exists. I don't know if you see that a lot, but I don't see that a lot for some reason. Maybe it's just, the handful of companies I work for. I don't actually see that a lot, even though the internet, everyone else seems to be doing it. So I might be in the minority, but I saw you nodding. I tend to just say where this column's empty. I pick a column, like in my case, a lot of times it's the ID column of the other table, because you should have an ID column you can join to, the primary key. And if that's missing, then a join wasn't made, and that's good enough for me. For me, it's easier to read than having where not exists. I don't know. So that was a very quick run through. I don't think I left you much room to talk in between. I'm sorry. Of the handful of joins. Did you have any thoughts or scenarios about all of them? Any of them?
So the thought that I had there at the end when you brought up the not exist is, and I don't have the ability to talk about this right now, but if you Google it, Bing it, whatever you want, the not exist is often used as a shortcut way. It has slightly different logic to it that allows it to essentially like check out of checking. Once it hits the first thing that doesn't meet the criteria, then it's done.
Once it finds the first thing that exists, it moves on because not exists.
Yes.
Right.
So where exists or where not exists can be shortcuts in some scenarios, as I understand it, to getting your data back a little faster. But I don't have examples. I've just seen it talking.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably just the way I was taught was you join them together and then you check if there's something in the other column.
Yeah.
Whether or not I would switch to something else for performance depends if I have a performance problem, right? I'm 100% fine doing some interesting creative things to get better performance. So I've done some terribly ugly things that have worked out. So I remember a particular time that I got like 100 times, 2 orders of magnitude faster performance by tripling the lines of code in the SQL, which I know it doesn't matter. But when the devs saw that, they're like, what is this? You're the one telling us we make our queries too big. And I'm like, performance test it, bro. And they're like, they hate it, but we'll use it because this is awesome. So anyway, yeah,
right.
I have no problem being creative if the performance is better, as long as it's readable. I mean, yeah. Things froze.
No, I
up
thought it was a
second.
good discussion.
Okay, I think we're back.
What about cross apply? Are we going to talk about that later? I assume yes, because you didn't bring it up.
Unless you really want to talk about it now.
I don't know.
When you were on your first week of, I mean, I'm not prepared, but do you remember being your first week of learning SQL and the joins are hard enough, and then someone's like, "Let's cross apply," and you're like, "What the heck is going on here?" And all the examples.
Yeah, we'll save that for later.
Probably. Yeah, it's basically if everything's 1-to-1, it's basically multiplication, right? Does that sound right to you as a quick teaser?
Yeah, as a quick overview, I remember reading years ago somebody who was super big on cross apply, and that person, whoever it was, I'll see if I can find it, showed how to use cross apply in so many different scenarios, and I was just super impressed.
Maybe we'll find those, and cross apply can be the next quick subject I touch on.
Yeah, maybe we'll.
I think maybe we will. All right. So I appreciate everybody coming out and checking us out. And over on YouTube, like, subscribe, do all the things. I really appreciate it. The questions today, we love the questions, so keep those coming. By the way, if you can't show up on the live stream, I already mentioned YouTube. You can check out our videos there. But you can also ask questions, holler at us, or best of all, correct me by joining our Discord. So join the Discord. There's always shenanigans there, especially if O'Grady pops his head back in. And come holler at me or join the conversations or ask questions. Maybe we'll answer it then, or maybe we'll answer on the live stream. So great. Love you all. Thanks for joining us. I'm Anthony Fortner, data engineer.
I'm Lee Markham, database administrator. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.